So when you talk about the training, and you're saying 6 months, I don't know if that sounds like a long time or if it doesn't sound like much. But at the end of the day, you were issuing firearms and bullets to people that were going to carry them around and were authorized by the state to use it. So how did you make the judgment that somebody was ready or wasn't ready to be handed that gun and that power?
Well, you have to look at the 6 months before the police academy and the 6 months after the police academy, because, and I'm speaking just for California, a background investigation on a person is not something that's done in a day. Our background investigations would take a minimum of 4 months. And if you look at all of the things we did, from the testing, from the psychological exam to the medical examination, make sure the guy doesn't have any, a back injury that's going to prevent him from doing his job. If you look at the neighborhood checks, if you look at everything, we were spending upwards of $40,000 per applicant. And that was before we even hired them. So it was actually worth it to me. And I said this many times to my background investigators. It's worth $40,000 for you to do a full background on someone and tell me, no, we shouldn't hire him, because that's much more, that's better money spent than spending $40,000 and hiring someone who's going to not be able to do the job. And the psychological exam is very important. And in California, it's an absolute mandatory requirement. We have to have a full psych on every person. And that's the 4 to 6 months before you hire them. And then you send him or her to the police academy. And then when they get out of the police academy, you don't just throw them the keys and say, all right, kid, here you go. We have field training officer programs that are extensive, that we had about a 60% success rate, and 40% of the people who we had invested all this money in, we would wash out and say, you're not going to be a deputy sheriff on the street. So while 6 months may seem short to some people, it's an incredibly intense training. It's 8 to 5, and with many Saturdays you're there, with a washout rate, a failure rate of the academy in the area of 75 to 80% of someone who's already
really
paid. Oh, absolutely.
I didn't know that. So Tom, the narrative that really surprises me, because the narrative going on right now is you get less training than a person that can, cut hair or do nails. And then once you are a police officer, that you have to spend a year or two being a prison guard before you get into the police system. Is that not true?
Some departments say you have to work in the jail as a correctional deputy before a deputy sheriff. We didn't have that. We listen, and here's the reason. The reason is because you're on probation for 12 months after we hire you. After you get out of the police academy, you're on probation for 12 months. Well, when you're on probation, it means you can be released, you can be fired without cause. No reason given, just, hey, you didn't seem to fit in, we're out of here. Well, I didn't want a person in a career field that wasn't going to be permanent, where they might have done a good job, and then after they were off probation, say, okay, you're going to be a deputy sheriff, and they didn't do a good job. I think that you really need to stay on track. But some sheriff's office, not police departments, but some sheriff's offices put people working in the jail. And the reason for that, Vance, is because finding people to work in a correctional facility is tough. That is not a job that is easily filled. And, the turnover is great, and the trainings and the liability is huge. And so the training is as extensive as being a deputy sheriff on the street. So, no, it's not the way that you said it. However,
I'm really glad to hear that, because I'll tell you, one of the worst experiences I ever had in my life was I was going to the Peace Corps, and I can't remember if it's because I was going to substitute teach for a while or the Peace Corps required I had to get fingerprinted. The only place you could get fingerprinted was the county jail where I grew up. So I go to the county jail, and I run into a kid that I used to play with maybe 3 or 4 times a week when I was a kid, from first grade all the way to 4th grade. He now is a correctional officer. He has become morbidly obese. So he's like 300 pounds. We walk in there, and he says, in order to go do the fingerprinting, we have to walk through the jail. So we actually had to walk past where there were prisoners, and there was a guy yelling something out, and he took this rod and he slammed it against the door and was like, quiet down in there. And I realized this person who I knew, who was a good, genuine person, is now some kind of a zombie. And in that zombie state that he's in, he is subjecting these prisoners to, like, I don't know, like the authority of him or something. And it was so repellent to me that I had made this decision, like, I don't want to talk to police officers maybe ever again. I want nothing to do with county jails or anything like that. And so then when I had heard that California was forcing all of their corrections officers to be prison guards, I thought, what would that do to your psychology if you were forced to spend so much time with the people that you've imprisoned? You'd start thinking everybody was maniacs. I don't know. So that's not on you. It's just my experience with people that are prison guards or jail guards was not a good one. And it really left a taste in my mouth that I'll never forget.
Well, first of all, I hope your morbidly obese friend is not watching or listening to your podcast. But
I don't think he is.
Let me tell you this. Some of the best deputy sheriffs that we had are deputy sheriffs who had worked in the correctional field. And the reason I say that is because they understood people. Vance, I'm going to make a statement, and I know we're getting close to the end, but the statement
we're good, man. As long as you're good, I'm good.
Okay. I'm going to say something that if you have any law enforcement officers listening to this, they're going to shake their head and they're going to think that I'm a village idiot. But let me clearly say this. Our jails are not full of bad people. Now, there are bad people in our jails. Let there be no doubt. There's murderers, there's rapists, there's burglars. People who need to be in jail are in jail. But our jails are not full of bad people. Our jails are full of people who got caught doing something that most other people do and they weren't caught. And an employee inside of a jail needs to understand that this is someone who may be an inmate today, but he's going to be standing behind you at the grocery store when you're in there with your family next week. And if you treat someone like an animal on the inside, they're very possibly going to treat you like an animal on the outside. And that is not the way. If you want to call yourself a correctional facility, you don't go in there and treat people like animals. You treat people as you would expect your brother to be treated. And I said that many times. I want you to assume that the inmates in there are related to you. And whatever you do for your relatives that are in jail is what you would do for another inmate, unless that other inmate is going to do something that would prevent you. You know, if he's going to spit on you or if he's going to have a cup of urine and throw on you, well, that changes all the rules. But most people are in jail because they got caught doing something wrong that most everybody else does also. They just didn't get caught. And society has said you're going to be put on timeout. And if you get an employee who understands that understands that it's not us against them, you know, and I've arrested law enforcement officers I've worked with, you know, they've been in my jail of guys that I used to work with. And it's not us against them. It's a person got caught doing something illegal and a judge sentenced them to go to jail. And a correctional facility is merely complying with the order of the judge to keep this person safely and, you know, in good medical condition during their time in custody. And once again, our conversation today has gone full circle of us against them. And it cannot continue to be us against them, or we're going to have the defund the police and the very strong walls that the Black Lives Matter, you know, the people hating law enforcement officers just because they put on a uniform. I listened to an interview the other day of a African-American law enforcement officer that said, hey, listen, when I put on my uniform, people hate me. But when I take off my uniform and I go out, people love me. He says they love me like I've never been loved before. And I think that's something that we all need to think about and say, do we want the peacekeepers of our communities to be felt as if they're hated, or do we want to hire the right peacekeepers to do the job, to protect us, and to make sure that bad people are taken off the streets so we can, I always say, so you don't have to lock your doors at night, even though I encourage people to lock their doors. Wouldn't it be nice to live in a society where we didn't have to lock our doors every night?
You're exactly right about the people in jail or the people that got caught, because I think any rational, normal human being, any man that's made it to the age of 35, definitely broke some rules along the way, and rules that, had you broken them and the luck just not fallen your way, you had one too many beers that you ended up being over the limit, but you made it home without an accident, versus you turned a corner too fast and you smashed into something and now you're in prison. That has always hung really heavy with me, because it's really difficult for me to be like, all those people in jail are bad and evil, because I've done some of that stuff that, had I been in the wrong spot, I'd be in prison too.
Sure. I get it, Vance. And you ready for the confession? Me too. So, and just because I'm a law enforcement officer doesn't mean that would get me out of getting in trouble, but I've done some things that, I'm certainly not proud of. But I think that as I said, we're humans, we're not robots.
Thanks for checking out this podcast short. If you're interested in the subjects that we're talking about, or the idea of how do you get better at communications, you may want to consider joining the Articulate Ventures Network. There, listeners like you can meet other listeners from all over the world. You can put up talks that you've given to ask for feedback and ways to improve, and you can even take courses that'll help you become a tangibly better communicator. That's the Articulate Ventures Network, with the link below.